I bought this loft for shelter. Then the peg box answered back.
SUA Part 1, The Exile and Hook. He was 19 and evicted. No address, no deposit, no room to return to. Just a coil of bed rope and $5 he had kept folded inside his grandmother's wooden tightening key. And with that $5, he bought a forgotten rope bed cordage loft outside Salem, in Essex County, Massachusetts, a place that had fallen off local maps in 1948. The north sill had rotted through. Half the roof sagged toward the marsh. The county condemned it on October 3, 2022, with demolition planned for the following spring. But beneath the rope-stretching frame, inside a tension peg box, unopened for 74 years, something waited that would alter the shape of his life. Before we continue, if stories like this mean something to you, hit subscribe and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. We love seeing how far these stories travel. Bram Keene had been tightening loose things his whole life without knowing it. As a boy in Lynn, he tied broken cabinet doors shut with shoelaces, wedged folded matchbooks under rocking chairs, and learned which stair in their third-floor apartment would complain after midnight. Nothing stayed repaired for long, but Bram kept trying. He liked the moment when strain became balance, when an object stopped asking to be noticed. His mother, Elaine, worked evening shifts at a pharmacy and slept with one hand over her eyes. She loved him in the exhausted way of people who ration everything, even tenderness. When bills arrived, she opened them standing at the sink, as though sitting down might make them heavier. The one place that held was his grandmother Ruth Keene's workshop, a narrow shed behind her house in Marblehead, smelling of beeswax, hemp dust, and the cold of iron tools. Every Saturday, Ruth set a rope bed upside down on 2 trestles and made Bram run his fingers along each cord before cutting anything. She taught him to twist 3 hemp strands clockwise, lay the finished rope counterclockwise so it would not unravel, warm the wax just enough to soften under a thumb, and lace the frame in a diamond pattern that shared weight instead of forcing it into one rail. At noon, they ate brown bread with apple butter from the same chipped plates. Then Ruth handed him the wooden tightening key, fitted its square mouth over a peg, and let him pull until the lattice rose firm beneath his palm. "Sleep tight is not a wish," she told him. "It is work somebody did before dark." Bram understood years later that she had not been talking only about beds. She meant that comfort had a maker, unnamed and gone by the time another person lay down. Ruth died in February of 2018 after a short illness she had concealed behind wool cardigans and peppermint lozenges. Her landlord cleared the shed before Bram and Elaine could reach it. The rope gauge, awls, wax pot, repair ledgers, and old bed keys disappeared into an estate sale. Bram recovered only one tightening key from Ruth's kitchen drawer, dark maple rubbed pale, where her hand had held it. At 19, he shared a second-floor room in Salem with Nolan Voss, who spoke softly enough to make each demand sound reasonable. Nolan labeled shelves, counted Bram's showers, and kept the thermostat at 58 while wearing a quilted vest indoors. He never struck a wall or raised his voice. He simply rearranged the apartment until Bram felt like an item stored without permission. Then Nolan added Bram's name to a lease amendment, stopped paying, and vanished before the landlord noticed. The eviction came on a wet Tuesday, November 8, 2022. Bram stood in the hallway, holding Ruth's wooden key, while the deputy set a yellow notice against the door with 2 strips of clear tape. Elaine had come from Lynn in her pharmacy smock. She'd read the forged addendum once, then looked past him at the rain slipping down the stairwell window. "You signed it, Bram. I cannot fix this." Exactly 8 words spoken without anger. That made them worse. He waited for his mother to say she believed him. She folded the notice along its printed crease, placed it on top of his duffel, and left before the deputy changed the lock. Her silence remained in the hall after her shoes were gone. For 6 weeks, Bram moved north and inland by the cheapest routes he could manage. He slept 2 nights beneath the overhang at Salem Depot, 1 in a Peabody laundromat until the attendant shook his shoulder, and 4 in a Beverly church basement where cots were numbered in black marker. His money fell from $31 to $18, then $11. In Gloucester, he spent a night behind a bait shop, breathing salt and diesel through his sleeve. In Danvers, he lay under a picnic shelter while sleet ticked across the metal roof. By the time he reached Ipswich, he had $5 left, the coil of bed rope looped through his duffel straps, and Ruth's key wrapped in a clean sock. He had stopped looking at rental boards. Rooms required deposits, references, and a current address. Jobs wanted the same address he needed a job to obtain. Each form returned him to a blank. On December 19th in the Salem Public Library, Bram went upstairs to warm his hands over a radiator and found a newspaper folded beside the microfilm cabinets. A county notice had been circled in blue pencil. Abandoned Cordage Loft. Tax title disposal, $5. Structure sold as is. The photograph showed a long roof, 2 blind windows, and a sign hanging by one chain. Under the legal description, someone had written, in the same blue pencil, "Ask clerk for Keene file." Bram read it 3 times. Then he placed Ruth's key on the table and fitted the $5 bill beneath it so the draft from the radiator could not move it. The bus left at dawn. He bought no ticket beyond the final stop his money allowed, trusting the remaining miles to his boots and the rope across his shoulder. At sunrise, Bram Keene was walking toward a building that seemed to know his name. Kaiutra Loi, 2 Sewer Part 2, The Arrival. The bus carried Bram as far as Beverly before the driver said the northern branch had been suspended for winter. He walked the remaining 11 miles, with the bed rope across his chest and his duffel striking one knee. By afternoon, rain hardened into snow. He slept in a hay barn beyond Wenham, burrowed between square bales, while the temperature fell to 23 degrees, and woke with chaff in his collar and one boot stiff with frost. He reached Salem after 9, descending toward the harbor over streets glazed pale at the edges. The city opened around him. Gable's Bakery, lifting its shade. North Shore Shoe Repair setting out a wooden last. Bell and Anchor Cafe washing its step. Hawthorne Hardware, rolling salt bins curbside. And Mercy Street Books switching on a yellow lamp. He passed each window slowly, gathering warmth from the sight of ordinary work. The county office occupied a granite building with steps worn hollow. Inside, wet wool and floor wax mingled beneath a ticking clock. A guard sent him to tax title and surplus property, where one woman sat behind folders bound with cotton tape. Her gray hair was held by a tortoiseshell comb, and blue ink marked the side of her thumb. The brass plate read, "Mrs. Edith Ward, Deputy Clerk." Bram laid down the newspaper notice. Mrs. Ward read the blue pencil note. "You understand the parcel has no water service?" "Yes, ma'am." "You understand the roof has been open 3 winters?" "Yes, ma'am." "You understand the county will not remove debris?" "Yes, ma'am." "You understand condemnation follows the property?" "Yes, ma'am." She looked at the tightening key beside his hand. "The purchase price is $5. Exact currency." He unfolded the bill. Mrs. Ward smoothed it, carried it to a brass register, and lowered the lever. The stamp landed with a flat blow, pressing the date through a red ribbon. She gave precise directions. Bridge Street West, Boston Street, Highland Avenue, past the cemetery wall, then the unmarked lane opposite the old pumping station. At the stone culvert, keep left, cross the timber bridge, and continued to the walnut trees. While tying the deed with green tape, she looked again at the key. Keene. Was Ruth Keene your relation? My grandmother. Mrs. Ward sat back. Years earlier, Ruth had come asking for tax maps of a cordage shop near the marsh. She carried a canvas tool roll and smelled of wax. Edith, then a junior clerk, had watched her return on 3 Saturdays before closing. She said the building belonged to people who knew how to keep a bed under a stranger. Did she own it? No, not on paper. Why was her name in the ad? It wasn't. Mr. Halen Records made that mark. Your grandmother left instructions in 1996. If the parcel reached open disposal and a Keene appeared, we were to show the old file. She returned with a slim folder. Inside lay a survey, 2 photographs, and a maintenance card bearing Ruth's signature beneath the words "Inspected rope frame, West Loft, no charge." In one photograph, Ruth stood before the same hanging sign, younger than Bram remembered, her hand against the door. She didn't say she had family, Mrs. Ward said. She didn't say much about before. People who repair things often leave the story inside the work. Bram signed the deed. His hand shook only once. The lane began beyond the close-set houses, where pavement narrowed to frozen ruts. A man in a green cap split kindling beside a mailbox, marked Pritchard. He raised his maul in greeting. A black dog with one white ear followed Bram to the property line, sniffed the rope, and sat as though its duty ended there. Beyond the culvert, 6 walnut trees leaned above the lane. The loft stood on a fieldstone foundation, roughly 24 feet by 40, its walls covered in weathered cedar shingles. The steep roof sagged between 2 northern rafters. A brick chimney lacked 3 courses at the crown. Over the double doors, flaking letters remained. Keene and Rowe, bed cordage and repairs. The surname did not feel like ownership. It felt like being recognized by a voice from another room. The front door had swollen in its jamb. Bram looped the rope through the iron handle, braced one boot against the foundation, and pulled until the lower hinge cried out. Cold air moved past him, carrying old hemp, tar, and mouse nests. Dust rose with the dry taste of plaster. The front room held 2 rope bed frames and a counter silvered by grit. Light entered through cracked windows, catching fibers that drifted without falling. The floor answered his boots in separate tones, some boards close and hard, others hollow above the crawl space. Lime plaster powdered beneath his fingers. In the back room stood the tarred workbench, a rope-stretching frame, and rows of pegs darkened by hands. Hemp coils hung from ceiling hooks like sleeping animals. When Bram shifted one, it whispered against itself. A flake of creosote dropped inside the chimney and broke, the sound passing through the building into marsh silence. There was no working pump, only a dry iron sink and a blue enamel cup. Outside, the well cap was frozen. He ate half a heel of bread saved from the church basement. It tasted faintly of soap. Before dark, he swept a place in the front room with a broom whose bristles curled inward. He laid his coat beneath his shoulders, the duffel under his knees, and the rope along the floor beside him. Wind pressed through a broken pane and moved the hanging sign. Each swing sent a measured knock through the frame. When the tide turned, salt entered the room. Water moved unseen beyond the walnut trees. The boards returned the day's cold through his coat, while the wooden key warmed slowly inside his closed hand. A simple cord could become shelter when people had nowhere to rest. And Cautra LOI 3 sur Part 3 The Discovery. At first light, Bram crossed the frozen yard with the blue enamel cup and found the well behind a leaning fence. Its stone curb was sound, though the wooden cover had split along the grain. He broke the ice with the handle of a rusted ladle, lowered a bucket on frayed rope, and listened nearly 6 seconds before water answered below. It came up iron cold and faintly sweet. The outhouse stood 30 yards east, tilted but usable, with a crescent cut through the door and a wasp nest under the seat. Bram cleared snow from the path, then spent the rest of that morning learning the loft's language. The fourth board beyond the front counter gave a sharp complaint. 3 planks beside the chimney shifted together. Near the workbench, one length of pine made no sound at all, even beneath his full weight. By the 3rd day, he could cross the building in darkness without waking it. He walked back into Salem, carrying the broken broomhead and a list written on the reverse of the condemnation notice. Hawthorne Hardware occupied a narrow storefront with bins reaching nearly to the stamped tin ceiling. The place smelled of kerosene, cedar shavings, and the mineral dust of old nails. The owner, Silas Hawthorne, had one eyebrow divided by a white scar. He stood behind the counter, rubbing linseed oil into the handle of a framing hammer. "You are the boy from the Cordage Loft. I own it now." Silas looked through the front window at Bram's rope-mended duffel. "That sentence needs either courage or poor judgment. Probably both." Bram set down his list. Silas read it without a comment, then turned the paper over and wrote, "Account, Bram Keene," across the top. "I cannot pay until I find work. You can pay $2 when you have $2. And before then, you remember what you took." He handed Bram a thin, water-stained book titled Repairs for the Owner-Built House. A dead carpenter's name was written inside the cover. "No charge," Silas said, "but return it with all its pages." Bram left with a chimney brush for $3.25, 20 feet of fiberglass rod for $4.80, a pound of cut nails for $1.10, lamp oil for 79 cents, a canvas dust sheet for $2.40, and a small tin of stove cement for $1.65. Silas wrapped the brush in newspaper and added a pair of cracked leather gloves without entering them in the ledger. The chimney took most of the following day. Bram spread the canvas beneath the fireplace opening and sealed its edges with boards. The damper had rusted half closed, so he worked it loose with lamp oil and the wooden handle of a cold chisel. From the roof, he fed the round steel brush down one rod at a time, turning clockwise so the threaded joints would not loosen. The first pass met resistance 6 feet below the crown. He withdrew the brush black with glazed creosote. The deposit had formed in hard, shining scales, where rain entered through the missing courses. Bram scraped them with a narrow hoe wired to the final rod, then brushed again. Soot descended in soft avalanches, thudding against the canvas below. Wind crossed the roof and found every opening in his coat. Twice he climbed down to warm his hands beneath his arms. Once the ladder shifted and he lay flat against the shingles until its feet settled again in frozen earth. After 5 hours, the brush passed cleanly from crown to smoke shelf. Bram removed nearly half a bushel of soot and creosote, black enough to turn the meltwater beside the foundation gray. He sealed 2 open mortar joints with stove cement, then held a burning twist of newspaper inside the firebox. The flame leaned upward. That evening, he built the first fire from cedar scraps no thicker than his thumb, adding split maple only after the flue warmed. Smoke drew without spilling. The brick face made small ticking sounds as heat entered it. He boiled well water in a dented kettle and cooked oats with the last apple from his duffel. The meal was thin, but steam touched the windows, and for the first time, the room gave something back. On the 5th morning, Bram began recording the workroom as Ruth had taught him to record a damaged bed, not by value, but by use. There was a long rope walk hook, with its handle polished nearly white, a cast-iron wax pot with a pouring notch, and a 3-groove hemp gauge screwed to the wall. Beneath the bench lay a wooden serving mallet, used to beat fibers smooth around a splice. 2 bone-fid needles rested in a drawer lined with newspaper from 1947. A brass tension scale hung beside a rack of square pegs. Against the rear wall stood the stretching frame itself, 12 feet long, its oak rails scarred by rope and weather. Under that frame sat a low box divided into compartments for tension pegs. Most of the pegs remained inside. They were maple, each cut with a shallow shoulder and a square head sized for a tightening key. Bram lifted them one by one, brushed off mouse dirt, and arranged them by wear. The newest were pale. The older ones had absorbed wax and skin until they looked almost burned. One compartment sounded wrong. He discovered it while tapping the box with the serving mallet. The first 3 divisions answered with the dry, open note of empty wood. The 4th returned a lower sound, shortened at the end. Bram tapped again. He removed every peg and weighed the box by lifting one corner. The right side rose easily. The left resisted, though the boards were the same thickness. He lay on the floor and ran his fingers beneath the base. No seam showed. Along the inner wall, however, a cedar disc had been fitted flush beneath a layer of hardened wax. Its grain ran across the grain of the box. Ruth had taught him that mismatched grain was rarely accidental. He warmed the wax with a cloth dipped in hot water, never using the knife that might scar the edge. When the surface softened, he worked a bone fid around the cedar disc. It moved less than a fingernail's width. Bram stopped, reheated the cloth, and began again. On the 4th pass, the disc turned. A narrow panel beneath the compartment released with a breath of cedar and trapped dust. Inside lay 3 packages wrapped in sailcloth, each bound with waxed cord in a square knot. A tin box occupied the final third of the cavity. Bram carried everything to the workbench. He did not cut the knots. He eased them backward with the fid, loosening the wax strands a fraction at a time. The first sailcloth bundle held Ruth's missing tools: 2 iron bed keys, a rosewood gauge, 3 polished fids, and the small brass wax spoon Bram remembered hanging above her bench. Her initials had been struck into the spoon's handle. The second bundle held dressed hemp, still dry beneath its wrapping, with skeins separated by twist and thickness. A paper label instructed that the longest fibers be saved for side rails, where strain remained constant through the night. The third contained a repair book, bound in brown cloth. Bram saw Ruth's handwriting on the first page, but closed it before reading further. Beneath the book rested an envelope bearing only one word: "For you." He placed it beside the tin box. The box had no lock. Its lid opened on a pressed rim that released with a faint metallic snap. Inside were paper packets, cloth purses, and banknotes laid flat beneath a cedar strip. Bram carried them to the front room, where the afternoon light was steadier, and began counting. He made columns on the back of the county survey. The paper money came first, mostly small bills folded around larger ones. Then came coins: worn Morgan silver dollars, Barber half dollars, Liberty Head gold pieces, and Indian Head cents, packed in paper rolls. He counted each group twice and checked the arithmetic with a carpenter's pencil. At the bottom of the tin lay a purple heart dated 1944, its ribbon faded toward brown. No name appeared on the front, but the reverse had been engraved Elias Rowe. When Bram finished, the total was $24,905. He sat very still. The money could have bought heat, food, new boots, perhaps a room with a lock no deputy could change. Yet the bills remained arranged in their careful rows. Someone had counted them before him. Someone had wrapped the coins against salt air and hidden the tools where only patient hands would reach them. Dusk entered before Bram moved. He returned the metal to its cloth pouch and placed the repair book and envelope on the workbench. He could not read them that night. Reading would turn the objects into instructions, and he had not yet decided whether he was entitled to obey. Outside, the snow had softened along the marsh edge. Bram walked beyond the walnut trees until the loft became a dark shape behind him. The tide lay black beneath a thin skin of reflected sky. Farther out, water lifted and lowered the reeds without hurry. He watched until the cold reached through his boots. A simple cord could become shelter when people had nowhere to rest. Cautra Loy for Sur, Part 4. The letter, morning, came clear and severe. Ice had formed inside the broken panes, feathering the glass around the cracks. Bram lit the fire, warmed his hands, and carried the envelope to the front counter. The writing on it leaned slightly forward, each capital drawn with a patient hook. He knew Ruth's hand before he opened it. My dear one, whoever you are, if you have found this, then the county has finally sold the loft, or the roof has fallen far enough to reveal what we could not bring ourselves to remove. I hope it was the first. In March of 1996, Dr. Miriam Cole at Massachusetts General Hospital in Boston told me the cancer had entered my liver. She gave me months, though I was granted nearly 2 years. I used part of that time to put this room in order and to decide what should be hidden, what should be given away, and what ought to wait for a careful stranger. The work began with Amos Keene, born in Gloucester in 1841, who opened a cordage shed here in 1872 with Elias Rowe. Amos's daughter Clara, born in Salem in 1878, kept the accounts and learned every knot. Clara's son Thomas carried the trade through the lean years after 1918. Thomas taught me, Ruth Keene, born in Marblehead in 1939, 4 generations, though the sign named only 2 men. The trade closed on October 17, 1962. The doors remained locked for more than 30 years. My brother Elias was killed in France during the Second World War. The Purple Heart was returned to our mother in 1945. She kept it beside the wax pot because she said grief, like hemp, must be dressed before it can bear strain. Should you choose to work here, keep the hemp at 65 to 70 degrees before twisting. Dress 3 parts beeswax with 1 part tallow, warmed no higher than 140 degrees. Give each rail cord 12 full turns before setting the peg. After lacing, let the bedstead stand 8 hours, then tighten again. Cord settles, so do people. The money came from repair work we did without charge after boarding house fires, dock accidents, and winter evictions. Those who could pay later sometimes did. Those who could not were entered in the brown book and owed nothing. Inheritance is not what lies untouched in a box. It is the next honest task, done with the tools somebody kept sharp for you. Use what is needed. Keep what can be kept. Leave some portion for the person who comes after. The house is not empty. It has been waiting. You are welcome here. Ruth Ann Keene. January 12, 1998. Bram read the letter twice. The second reading took longer because he stopped at Elias's name, at the temperatures, at the instruction to wait 8 hours before tightening again. When he finished, he folded the pages along their original creases. He did not smooth the wrinkles Ruth had made. Inside the repair book, names filled the pages in blue and black ink. Mrs. Lenora Pike, 2 beds after the Derby Street boarding house fire. Samuel Orr, dock injury, no charge. The Alvarez family. Winter lockout. 3 frames restrung. Beside some names appeared later payments, 50 cents, a loaf, 6 candles, roof labor. Beside others, only a small horizontal line. Near the back, Ruth had drawn a map of the yard. A mark stood beyond the rear door, 11 paces from the chimney, where the marsh grass began. Bram put on his coat and counted carefully. At 11 paces, snow covered a flat granite marker, no larger than a serving board. He cleared it with his gloves. Cut into its face was a 3-strand rope crossed by a square peg. Beneath it were the initials ER and the dates 1921-1944. Elias Rowe had been brought home in name, if not in body. Bram returned to the workroom and took the brass wax spoon from the sailcloth bundle. Ruth had once used it to carry flame from the stove to the small spirit lamp beneath her wax pot. He filled the lamp, trimmed its blackened wick, and touched a match to it. The flame rose no higher than his thumbnail. He set the purple heart beside it. For several minutes, the metal, the spoon, and the small fire occupied the full width of the world. Afterward, Bram began to notice how he had reached the loft at all. The church volunteer in Beverly had slipped an extra apple into his duffel without asking his name. The laundromat attendant in Peabody had let him sleep until the final wash ended before waking him. Mrs. Ward had opened a file she might easily have forgotten. Silas Hawthorne had written Bram's name into an account book when Bram owned nothing but debt. None of them had rescued him. Each had simply made the next hour possible. There may be someone watching who remembers such an hour. Perhaps a stranger paid for a meal, offered a dry seat, carried a box, or believed one sentence when nobody else did. What small kindness was once given to you, and whose next hour might you make possible now? That evening, Bram wrapped Ruth's tools in clean cloth and placed them beside his bedroll. The repair book rested beneath the tightening key. He left the lamp burning until the wax spoon held a circle of warm light, then pinched the flame out before sleep. Thou Cow Tra Loi 5 Sua Part 5. The Slow Rebuild Section 5A. December. The roof. The first true snow came on December 3rd and left 7 inches pressed against the north wall. Bram watched it enter through the broken roof in narrow white threads, then opened repairs for the owner-built house to the roofing chapter. He read it once beside the stove, once standing beneath the sagging rafters, and once more with a pencil, marking every instruction he did not trust himself to remember. The loft measured 24 by 40 feet, with 2 roof planes roughly 26 by 42, after allowing for pitch and overhang. He calculated 26 squares of cedar shingles, 3 rolls of felt, and 48 pounds of galvanized nails, then added 10%, because old roofs rarely honored clean arithmetic. Silas examined the figures and took a roofing hatchet from beneath his counter. Its cheek was dark with age, and the gauge pin had worn smooth. My brother used this 30 years. I cannot take it. You can return it, sharpened. Silas also sent Abel Pritchard, the man with the green cap, who had roofed houses before arthritis bent 2 fingers on his left hand. Abel refused payment and brought his own chalk box. They worked 11 days. The sagging northern rafter had split beside an old knot. Bram lifted it with the bottle jack, while Abel fitted a sister rafter alongside, fastening the sound wood with carriage bolts. They snapped chalk lines across the felt, set each shingle with a 1/4-inch gap, and kept the joints staggered so water could not find a straight path inward. Abel taught Bram to drive each nail in 3 strokes. Set, sink, stop. That nail's proud. Bram raised the hatchet. Pull it. By December 15th, the final ridge cap lay straight beneath a pewter sky. Bram climbed down, crossed the front room, and looked up. Snow remained outside. Nothing fell through. Section 5B. January. The chimney. The chimney showed its damage once the roof stopped leaking. Several bricks had spalled, their faces peeling away in red flakes, while the mortar between them powdered beneath Bram's thumb. He dismantled the loose crown by hand, numbering the sound bricks in chalk. Silas supplied hydraulic lime and a sack of fire clay, warning him not to use modern cement against the softer historic masonry. Bram mixed 3 parts screened sand to 1 part hydraulic lime for the outer joints. Around the flue, he added 1 part fire clay to every 3 parts mortar. January, remained in the 20s. For 3 weeks, Bram worked beneath a canvas windbreak tied to the chimney stack. He warmed the mixing water, dampened each brick before setting it, and packed the joints with a narrow pointing iron. His bare hands gave him the necessary feel, but they went numb every 15 minutes. He climbed down, held them near the stove until they burned, then returned before the mortar stiffened. The top courses rose slowly. He rebuilt the crown with a slight outward slope and left a drip edge clear of the brick faces. On January 27th, he lit a test fire with newspaper, cedar, and 2 maple splits. The smoke climbed without hesitation. Outside, a gray ribbon left the chimney and bent cleanly toward the marsh. Bram stayed in the yard until the last trace disappeared. Section 5C, late January, the floor suite. With the chimney drawing and the roof closed, the floor no longer seemed merely old. It appeared recoverable. The planks were white pine, wide enough to show the path of the original saw, fixed with hand-cut rose-head nails. Bram set every raised head with a nail punch, lifted 2 damaged boards near the door, and patched the ends with pine salvaged from a partition in the back room. Silas rented him a random orbit sander for $14 a day. Bram made 3 passes. 80 grit removed the packed grime in the black channels beside the walls. 120 softened the first cut. 220 left the board smooth, without erasing the shallow tool marks that proved another hand had dressed them. Dust entered everything. It settled inside his cuffs, along his eyelashes, and in the wax pot beneath a cloth he had forgotten to tie down. He wiped the floor with mineral spirits, then laid 3 thin coats of oil, allowing each to sink before rubbing away the excess. The final coat cured for 48 hours while Bram slept in the workroom and stepped outside to eat. The wood changed from dark honey toward mahogany, though it remained pine beneath the color. One morning he woke with no strength for work. The sander waited by the wall. The oil rags had been spread safely over the stone foundation to dry. Bram carried the enamel cup to the marsh and watched a great blue heron stand in the shallows, its body motionless while the tide moved around its legs. He did no work that day. The next morning, he began again. Section 5D, February, the windows. There were 8 windows in all. 3 had no glass, 4 held panes cracked from corner to corner, and 1 retained an original sheet from 1788, wavy and faintly green, with tiny bubbles caught inside it. Bram preserved that pane. He removed each sash, labeled it in pencil, and cut the old putty with a heated knife. After bedding the replacement glass, he rolled DAP 33 glazing putty between his palms, pressed it into the rabbet, and drew the putty knife in one deliberate pass so the bevel met the sightline from inside. The sash cords had turned to dust. He replaced them with 1/4-inch cotton cord, feeding each length over the pulley and tying a figure-8 knot through the counterweight opening. The weights rose inside the wall with a low iron whisper. Some joints required patching with thin slips of oak. Others needed only glue and clamping. Bram kept the original glass where it remained sound, even when the view through it bent the walnut trees into gentle curves. He set the 8th window on February 28th. As he tightened the final sash screw, a chickadee landed on a bare walnut branch outside. It leaned toward the restored pane, black cap bright against the snow, then struck the branch once with its feet and flew toward the marsh. Bram lowered the sash. It held at any height. Cautre Loi, 6 Sua section. Late February, the plaster. The walls near the chimney carried horsehair plaster over hand-split oak lath, and Bram's first 3 patches failed. One cracked before sunset. Another sagged away from the keys. The third dried too quickly and came off in his palm like a broken plate. Silas found an old burlap bag in the hardware cellar, filled with horsehair saved by his brother. Bram washed it, cut the fibers to thumb length, and mixed them into lime plaster until each handful held together without clumping. He dampened the lath and pressed on a scored scratch coat, forcing plaster through the gaps to form keys behind the wood. Over that went a 3/8-inch brown coat, leveled with a straight edge, and left to cure 72 hours beneath damp cloth. The finished coat measured barely 1/8 inch. When the last patch dried without opening, Bram ran his palm across it. These patches will hold another 100 years. He left the small irregularities visible. Section 5. Doris, Caleb, Reverend Boyd. By then the town had begun assisting without calling it assistance. Doris Vale, who owned Bell and Anchor Cafe, wore a silver pencil through the knot of her hair. Twice a week she left a paper bag on the doorstep before dawn. Inside were heel sandwiches, boiled eggs, and sometimes a square of gingerbread wrapped in wax paper. Bram carried the third bag back to the cafe and placed 2 coins on the counter. Doris pushed them toward him with one flower-marked finger. In candles when the shop reopens. There was no promise that it would reopen. She turned to the grill before he could answer. Caleb Pritchard arrived one Saturday on a red Schwinn, a splitting maul balanced across the handlebars. He was 16, narrow-shouldered, and missing the tip of his left mitten. Without introduction, he began breaking the storm-fallen walnut limbs stacked beside the foundation. Bram offered him $1. Caleb shook his head and kept swinging. My mother said, about your grandfather. Bram did not correct him. Ruth had taught him that gratitude sometimes required leaving another person's version of the story undisturbed. Reverend Boyd passed each morning at 7:30 in a long brown coat polished at the elbows. He had a white mustache that moved before the rest of his face when he smiled. He never entered unless invited. He tipped his hat, inspected the day's work from the lane, and once, while Bram struggled with a warped door frame, placed both hands on the jamb until the screws caught. Before leaving, he gave the same 4-word prayer. Keep his hands steady. By March, Bram could identify each person by sound. Doris's car idling once at the gate. Caleb's bicycle chain skipping under load. Reverend Boyd's cane touching the frozen culvert. The loft no longer received kindness from strangers. It received neighbors. Section 5G. Cellar and Easter egg. Bram had postponed the cellar since February 11th when thawing ground revealed the outline of its outer door beneath brambles. He opened it after the windows were finished, lifting the warped hatch with a rope loop and a fence post used as a lever. 7 granite steps descended to a 12 by 15-foot floor of fitted fieldstone. The air smelled of wet iron and old apples. He carried the spirit lamp in one hand and tested every tread before trusting his weight. At the center lay a dressed granite slab, unlike the surrounding stones. A 3-strand rope and square peg had been carved into its face, the same mark cut above Elias Rowe's memorial. Bram brushed away the grit but did not lift it. The edges were too exact, and the stone had waited too long to be opened merely because he was curious. Beneath the 3rd step, his fingers touched oak. A small box had been wedged behind the riser. Inside, wrapped in faded linen, lay a brass key whose bow had been shaped into the cordage mark. Beside it was a tintype dated 1903. The photograph showed a young woman standing outside the loft, one hand holding a rope walk hook. Her mouth, brow, and narrow jaw were Bram's own, altered only by time and dress. On the back, in brown ink, someone had written, Clara Keene, daughter of Amos, age 25, summer of 1903. Bram carried the photograph upstairs and set it near Ruth's letter. The brass key remained on the mantel. He did not know what it opened. Section 5H, March and April. Spring, Snow withdrew from the foundation in gray shelves. The creek beyond the culvert grew loud enough to hear from the workbench, and the walnut branches released long, green catkins that moved in every breath of wind. Bram repaired the front doors and cleared the last ruined plaster, but he did not begin making full bed cordage that spring. Ruth's tools deserved better than urgency. He chose one worn silver coin from the cache and exchanged it for hemp, beeswax, and tallow. On short frames made from scrap oak, he practiced even twist, square shoulders, and the pressure required to seat a peg without bruising its head. Some cords loosened overnight. Others carried unequal strain and pulled the frame out of true. He kept them all. The house was patient. So was he. Part 6. The Epilogue. 2 winters later, on December 14, 2024, Bram finished his first complete rope bed. He had built the frame from ash salvaged from a storm-damaged tree, planing the rails until their corners held light without feeling sharp. The cord was long fiber hemp, dressed warm with Ruth's 3-to-1 wax mixture. Bram laced the diamonds from the center outward, counted 12 turns at each rail, and seated the final maple peg with her tightening key. Then he waited 8 hours. At dusk he returned and tightened the settled cord 1 measured turn. The lattice rose beneath his palm, level and quiet. He placed no mattress on it. That night, he sat beside the frame with the repair book open and listened to the cord accept its burden. The restored loft remained spare. White pine floors caught the stove light. The old counter bore its knife marks beneath fresh oil. 8 windows opened and held. Ruth's tools hung above the tarred bench, each outline traced by use rather than display. Bram had left one roof timber unpainted, its sister rafter visible beside the split, so the repair would never pretend there had been no damage. The brass key stayed on the mantel until the following spring. During a windstorm, one of the older walnut trees lost a limb above the lane. Bram and Caleb cut the branch into manageable lengths. Beneath a collar of moss where the limb had joined the trunk, Caleb found a narrow brass plate fixed to the wood with 4 green screws. The plate bore the cordage mark. Bram brought the key from the mantel. Its bit entered the opening without resistance. Inside the hollow tree was a copper tube sealed with wax. The tube held a folded 48-star American flag and a note written by Clara Keene on September 29, 1918, while American soldiers were fighting in the Meuse-Argonne offensive. Clara wrote that her husband, Daniel, had gone to France with the Army engineers. Before leaving, he had wrapped the flag himself and asked her to keep it where living wood surrounded it. The note did not speak of glory. It described Daniel's hands, which could splice wet rope in darkness, and his habit of testing every knot twice before trusting another person's weight to it. He returned from the war with a damaged lung and died 6 years later. Clara's final instruction was plain. If the tree survived longer than the names on the shop sign, the flag should belong to whoever still knew why the ropes were tightened after settling. Bram refolded the note along Clara's creases. He did not place the flag on the wall. He made a cedar box, lined it with unbleached linen, and kept the flag and both letters together beneath the repair book. On June 6, 2025, the 81st anniversary of the Normandy landings, Bram carried Elias Rowe's Purple Heart to Green Lawn Cemetery in Salem. Mrs. Ward had found Elias's mother's grave through county records. Bram placed the medal beneath the granite marker long enough for Reverend Boyd to read the name aloud, then returned it to its cloth pouch. Honor did not require abandoning what had been kept. The money remained mostly untouched. Bram used $1 silver for his first cordage materials, a second to purchase ash saw logs, and 2 worn $half to repair the well pump. He spent no more of the cash. He wrapped the remaining coins and notes in fresh archival paper, returned them to the tin box, and sealed it with waxed cord. On top, he placed a card in his own hand. For the next one, use what is needed. Leave enough to begin again. He hid the box inside the tension peg compartment, though not beneath the same cedar disc. A future finder should need patience, but not Ruth's exact memory. The shop reopened without a sign in the newspaper. Doris pinned an index card to the cafe corkboard between a piano lesson notice and an advertisement for seasoned firewood. Rope beds, restrung and repaired. Keene Cordage Loft, pay what you can. No bed refused after fire or eviction. The first request came from an innkeeper with 2 sagging frames. The second came from a woman restoring her father's house. By autumn, Bram kept a mailing list of 43 names in the back of Ruth's repair book. He accepted money when it was offered, candles when it was not, and once a bushel of apples that lasted through December. He entered every job with the same horizontal line Ruth had used when nothing was owed. Caleb returned after his first year at trade school, carrying a board wrapped in an old blanket. He had grown broader through the shoulders, though the same red Schwinn leaned against the walnut tree. The board was carved walnut, its letters cut by hand. Keene and Rowe bed cordage and repairs and daughters Bram traced the final words. "There aren't any daughters?" he said. Caleb shrugged. There weren't any on the old sign either. The carving was not a correction of Bram. It was a correction of the building. They hung it above the double doors, using the original iron eyes. Doris stood in the lane holding a paper bag. Silas watched from his truck. Mrs. Ward had come without her county coat, the blue ink still marking one thumb. Nobody made a speech. When the sign settled against the shingles, the wind lifted it once and returned it gently to the wall. That winter, Bram began his own letter. He used Ruth's fountain pen, repaired with a new bladder, and wrote at the same counter where he had first counted the cash. The first line came without revision. "My dear one, whoever you are." He described the sister rafter, the granite slab he had chosen not to lift, the original window pane, and the way hemp revealed poor tension by morning. He recorded the names of those who had helped, including the laundromat attendant, whose name he never learned. He explained that a person did not need to be a Keene to continue the work. He did not describe Nolan or the forged lease. Some debts were not inheritance. Near the end, Bram wrote that the repair book had taught him the difference between saving an object and keeping a place ready for another human being. A simple cord could become shelter when people had nowhere to rest. He signed the letter, folded it twice, and placed it beneath the heirloom tools. Then he tightened the completed bed, one final quarter turn, and opened the front door to the evening air. Across the marsh, water darkened under the winter sky. Behind him, the stove drew cleanly, the windows held, and the new sign moved on its chains. The rope bed cordage loft waits. It has always waited. In the county office, Mrs. Ward kept Bram's $5 bill in the rear of her desk drawer, beneath the old Keene file. She had exchanged $5 of her own to balance the register that morning. The stamped bill remained folded beneath a wooden ruler, ready to prove that ownership had once begun with everything a young man had left. Script complete. Total approximately 4,300 characters.